Suzie, what's Women's Tech Forum?
Women's Tech Forum, my mic?
Yep.
Women's Tech Forum was established about 3 years ago, and it was a group of us from within the industry, and we define our part of the industry as cloud infrastructure. So the women who are building the cloud and powering the internet, and it really started with 4 of us who got together for a drink at PTC about, as I said, 3 years ago. And we decided, well, why don't we try and see if there's any other women who'd be interested in this? And over the 3 years or so, we've grown to 750 women strong. We're very much centered around the industry conferences that include PTC, ITW, Capacity Europe. I think we're about to launch into doing some work with NANOG this year. That would be one of our goals for sure. And it's really a forum and an opportunity for the women within our industry to network and meet people that they might not otherwise do so, that they might not have the opportunity. So it's generally those on the buy side, the sell side, peering, engineering. And yeah, it's great. Very much a grassroots effort, but it's going from strength to strength.
Thank you. And perfect timing. Okay, so welcome. I'm Dave Temkin. I'll have the panelists introduce themselves in a moment. I want to just real quick set some background for why we're here and what we're going to talk about. I'm going to put this slide up. It's not germane to what we're going to talk about today. It's germane to what we talked about last time, which was NANOG in Austin, which was very focused around inclusion and how do we bring people into this environment and how do we help them thrive. And we talked a lot about the different dimensions of what makes, what could and what would help make NANOG more diverse. I happened to notice this. I had nothing to do with it. Aside from when I was registering, I noticed that we're collecting gender information. And I was like, wow, that is fantastic. And I took a quick screen cap of it and I tweeted and just, basically gave NANOG, the organization, a virtual pat on the back for it. And a person who is a friend who absolutely has everyone's best interest at heart asks, why ask anymore at this point? Is that information needed for something within the org and the event? And yes. So if you're asking yourself that question, why? We don't know what the representation is in this room unless we ask, because people need to tell us. And we don't know how effective these discussions are unless we have some amount of metrics to guide them. So I just wanted to say that, this is super important as we talk about the type of people that we are after, which is to get new people in the room. And I'm really excited to talk about this with our panelists. So real quick, Suzie, you introduced yourself already. But what I would ask you is, who is one person in your life that you can point back to that they are why you're here today?
Great. So again, Suzie Gleeson. I also work, my day job is I work for Digital Realty. I'm on the sales side. And I'm also a co-founder of the Women's Leadership Forum, which is the women's network within Digital Realty, because when I joined there 3.5 years ago, there wasn't one. And so I felt it was important that we try and get something established internally. I've spent my entire career in this industry, from buying and selling switch minutes to selling wavelengths, IP, and all the way through to data centers. One of the most pivotal points for me was when I was working in London many, many years ago, and I was fortunate enough to win a green card in a lottery, that I had a boss that I worked for at AT&T who really gave me that opportunity to come to the US. She sponsored me over here and got me established so that I could really start my career here. So when I think back, that was probably one of the most pivotal moments for me.
Nick?
Hi, I'm Nick McKeown. I'm a professor of computer science and electrical engineering at Stanford. And I'm also an escapee from London who came here about 30 years ago this year. And but I trace my interest or the pivotal point for me. I had a careers counselor when I was in high school, growing up in England. England at that time, still not known for a very large tech industry. And my careers counselor said to me, why would you want to go into engineering? You're smart. Why don't you do something creative and interesting? Do you want to fix trains for the rest of your life? I went to a very good public state school, and I think for the next year I was going to damn well show him. And it was one of the biggest drivers for me to actually go into tech. When otherwise, and I saw other very capable people around me. And in fact, when I graduated with a degree in electrical engineering in the mid-1980s, the most popular profession amongst those who graduated with me was accounting. Not electrical engineering, not computer science. And it tells you what it was like then. It's improved since then, but that was a pretty pivotal point for me.
Thank you. I'm Dave Temkin. When you put together the slide, you get the privilege of picking which picture you get to put up. I felt like that represented me best, especially my hairline. I'm VP of infrastructure at Netflix, basically everything to do with our technical infrastructure from script to screen for on-prem and near-prem networks and systems. I would say, and this may be a slight repeat from last time, but when I was in high school, I managed to score a co-op at Bristol Myers Squibb, the pharmaceutical company, something that mostly college kids would get. And they put me in help desk. And for those of you who know me, you can imagine that really didn't end very well. Someone calling me and asking me to fix their printer was not what my career was destined to do. And so I was not necessarily the best person at that job, but my manager saw something in me, and I was really interested in what the network folks were up to. And he let me go and kind of shadow them, and the rest is history for me. So, Julia.
Thanks. Is my mic on?
You are.
Beautiful. Hi, everyone. My name's Julia. My pronouns are they and them. And yeah, I've been working at Netflix for about a year and a half. And this feels a little bit like a cheap shot, but the person that comes to mind for me is Wade Davis, whom I'm replacing on this panel.
You are.
And he and I met about a decade ago when we were working with LGBTQ young people, and we both thought that we were there to educate those young folks, and we realized that, in fact, we both had a lot to learn, and so he modeled for me what it was to center other folks in inclusion work, right? And say, for instance, like he really champions women, and he is obviously not a woman. And so that really underscored a lot of my inspiration for my career.
Thank you. Vijay.
Cool. Thank you. I'm Vijay Gill. I'm the head of engineering for Databricks, which does large-scale distributed data processing, Spark, AI, machine learning, so on and so forth. The pivotal moment, I think, came for me was, is Lee Howard here in the audience anywhere? Lee Howard?
I don't see him.
Okay, he's not here. I saw him outside a couple of minutes ago. They took a chance on me. Lee Howard and Doug Ian were the hiring managers at UUNet, and I had no idea what I was doing. Completely, I was off the rails. I was a pretty demonic creature back then, looking back. And they hired me. And that basically they took a chance on me for somebody with no background and no kind of, I was a computer science and a math major, not a networking, I knew nothing. They took a chance, gave me a bunch of T1s and a couple of circuits and let me loose. And from there, I kind of like went into this business. The biggest learning for me was at UUNet, talking to Louis Mamakis and Mike Odell, and they taught me that at scale, you can't run systems. You have to build systems that run systems. And that kind of metacognition kind of just exploded in my head. And I've been kind of running around in this space ever since. Thank you.
Thank you. Rami.
Hello, my name is Rami Rahim. I am Juniper CEO. So almost to the day 23 years ago, I graduated from Stanford, came across a little startup company called Juniper Networks that had a pretty audacious goal that I thought was pretty exciting. They took a bet on me, and 23 years later, 5 years ago, I had the honor and privilege of taking on the CEO role. But actually, half of my career at Stanford, at Juniper, was in, or has been in, developing products, systems, software, and silicon. Many people have had a very pivotal influence on my career. I've moved around quite a lot and grown through the organization, as you might imagine. I should, however, mention that when I moved to Silicon Valley from Toronto prior to going to Stanford, my ambition and my goal was to get into computer graphics. And there was one person, in fact, a professor that happens to be on this panel, that kicked my ass in networking and ultimately got me to see a little bit of the light in terms of the challenges that had to be solved for the networking domain that I thought were really interesting, exciting, and I think that definitely had an influence on my decision to enter into the field.
It's fun to hear these stories and how they all kind of come back home in one way or the other. What I want to do just to frame the panel real quick, the Master of Efficiency pointed out, Mr. Gill pointed out that I should do this. I think it's a great idea. Just say what I want everyone in this room to get out of this panel and what I want the panelists to get out of it. The key thing here for people in this room especially is how do we help our attendees grow, right? So how do we help our members, the people in this room, grow and find, if they are, looking to get into greater technical leadership, people leadership, things like that. We also want to talk about how you can all help get new people both into this room and into your organizations, and help also evolve NANOC where it makes sense. They certainly would love to hear your opinions on this. So this panel will be relatively conversational. I'll ask a couple of direct questions, but anyone is welcome to jump in whenever you'd like. Also happy to accept questions from the audience at any point in time. So if you want to ask a question, you don't have to wait till the end. Get up, wait at the mic, and I'll find a spot to get you in there. So let me ask first, Nick, what are the big trends that you're seeing in education? You'd given me a number about a 500% increase in CS students as of late. What's up with that?
Yeah, I see sort of three parts of the sausage making factory of how we create new engineers or new people that might be in this room. And one part is how do we train the current generation of networking students? And as you might imagine, most of that is heading towards software because we're expecting that there's going to be a much larger fraction of time in development of software. Maybe I'll come back to that a little bit later though. Where we've seen the most growth and it is in the number of students who are choosing to major in computer science. You've probably heard stories about this already. At Stanford, we've seen over a 500% increase in the number of students declaring computer science as a major in the last 7 years. Now, universities don't change very fast. So a 500% increase meant that computer science went from being the third largest major to now 3 times as big as the second largest major in that short time. It's a dramatic change. Nearly every university in the country is seeing the same thing. So there's a massive increase. Now, many of those students are going into AI and machine learning, and so maybe they won't end up in this room. But there is, of course, an increase all across the board. And so we've seen now classes with over 1,000 students in them. This is kind of startling at a relatively small university where our incoming class is only 1,700 and we have 1,000 in a single class. So it is a bit strange, and we're trying to adapt to it. One thing that we've seen is the student body itself who are studying computer science is becoming more diverse. We have much better numbers in terms of the male-female ratio, which has gone from a extremely awful, pathetic low point in 2007 as around 10% of female computer science students. Today it hovers around about 38%. So in 12 years. So as the student body has grown, so has not only the number, but the fraction of female students who are choosing to major in computer science. We take that as very encouraging, but it's still got a long way to go. And I would say that even at this point, it's not a very solid number and that it wavers, right? And so we have a lot more work to do. Nationally, the picture is not quite so rosy. There's still about an 80-20 ratio between men and women going into computer science, computer engineering. There was a study from the CRA last year, Computer Research Association, sort of indicating that is continuing. So clearly, nationwide, we have a lot to do. What's perhaps even more sort of discouraging, I think, is that we don't really do a good job nationally of tracking the number of underrepresented minorities that are going into computer science. It's actually very hard to get good numbers. And if you're not even taking the metrics and not even studying the numbers, then you can't really be doing a very thoughtful job. So we clearly have a lot of work to do there as well.
Julia, what do you think about that? What do you think contributes to that gap, that 80-20 number?
Yeah, great question. Well, I think part of it is in terms of the difficulty with measuring, right, is that I think we have to actually expand our categorizations, right? So for instance, thinking about gender, right? Like let's think about all genders, not only men and women, right? But I think it's beyond that. I think for those of us in this room, it requires that we signal to students that we actually want them, right? And that they can do this. And I think that requires us to sort of reimagine what intelligence looks like, right? Reimagine what is smart, who gets to own what knowledge looks like, right? Is it certain universities, right? If your networks that you pull from when you hire, right, reflect you, then I think if I'm a student who's just starting college and I don't see myself represented, or maybe I'm at an HBCU, right, and I don't see folks recruiting from my school, I think that signals, right, that I can't succeed. So I think it's on us to really reimagine what that intelligence looks like and source from places that have not historically sort of been recruited from.
And, if we think about education, what are there things that can be done, and this is just a general question to the whole panel, things that can be done that people in this room can do, others that, can encourage their peers to do, to bring more people in, regardless of who they are, to this industry. At an earlier point, to your point, Nick, people are really thinking differently about what majors they're going to take, but they're going into whatever the current hotness is more than, thinking about what infrastructure underpins that hotness.
There are certainly things that we can do. One thing that we've started to do is an outreach program to high school students, and particularly outside of the United States. There's about 1 million new jobs in computer science every year around the world. Nearly all of those are in the US, China, and India, overrepresented, in fact. And so there's a lot of the world that is actually falling further and further behind in terms of representation in our field. And so it's very hard to break out of that because there's obviously a snowballing effect that works in both directions. And so we've been teaching high school students in a number of different countries, particularly Turkey, the Czech Republic, and Bogota, Colombia, and this year adding Nairobi in Kenya, where we teach high school students who otherwise have had no experience of computer science. They only know how to switch on a computer. And so what we've seen is a big increase in the number of students who then move to want to study computer science in university in those countries. And it really taught me a lesson, actually, which is if you expose students to something that they otherwise wouldn't have experienced. Most of them have never met an engineer. Most of them don't know what software is. They're on their phone with their apps, but they have no experience of what it means to create it. And perhaps for us, given how familiar we are with that, it's easy to forget actually what that onboarding process looks like. And so one thing that you can do, like we're trying to do too, is go in, talk to high school students, middle school students at universities, at schools. There will be a school near you where there will be students who have probably never met an engineer, doesn't know what an engineer does. Go and tell them about what you do, why it excites you, how you got into it. Maybe offer to mentor them. Maybe one day write them a letter, right? Just all those really kind of small steps. And I think one of the things you'll find is the eyes open.
Can I add to that, Dave?
Yeah, of course.
So, as with other large tech companies in the Valley and elsewhere, obviously recruiting from schools, from universities is a really amazing way of increasing the diversity of our organization. If I look at the progress that Nick cited in terms of who's choosing technical degrees, computer science, we tap into that. Completely agree with starting early. And in fact, Juniper has gone beyond just colleges and foreign partnerships with schools like Cristo Rey High School in San Jose that serves, underserved communities out there. And we bring them in, we even give them internships at Juniper. And so that starting early is really important. And I'd even double down on that and say, the question was asked earlier, who was pivotal in your career or in your life in choosing a career in tech? For me, one of the most pivotal people was my father, who at a very young age instilled in me this sort of sense of curiosity and wanting to get into technology. And I find myself right now with my kids extra conscious, because I think right now we live in a society, in a culture where boys are encouraged to expose themselves to computers and robots and so forth. And that has a lasting impact and a lasting effect. And I think things are improving, but not as much as they need to improve. And I am extra conscious of the conversation we have at our dinner table with my boy and my girl around the decisions that they make in the rest of their life. So I just think it starts really early, and we should be conscious of that.
Vijay, did you have something?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this. A couple of things that I've done personally myself is to go out and talk at colleges, talk at schools, talk about the experience, talk about how you got started. One of the things that I've noticed is where you end up depends a lot from where you start. So there is a gradient against URM, underrepresented minorities and women, mostly, as Rami mentioned, from very early age. And then the second part is that especially in schools like that feed into Stanford or that feed into Harvard or Berkeley, you've already pre-selected like a huge a selection of folks that are already kind of like of A type, normally tend to be on the wealthier spectrum and tend to have a set of advantages when they started out earlier. So I gave a talk at a college in India 2 years ago. The people there were cognitively very smart, but they had no idea how to interview. And so as a result, the pass rate for those colleges was terrible. But then you look back, and you can Google for this. It's like there are classes at Stanford, like CS9, which tells you how to crack a technical interview. It's not like you take that interview and you become smarter. It just teaches you and prepares you how to crack an interview. The same thing, there's an excellent engineering talk at MIT called The Missing Semester. Mm-hmm. If you go to MIT, you already get a huge head start. And then you have all these things that layer on that when you graduate from MIT, you're prepared, you have better internships, and you go slide right into top tier companies, and the cycle just kind of perpetuates and repeats itself. So the thing that concretely we can do here is more apprenticeship, more interns, earlier interns, go out, talk to people. These people are not stupid. They're as smart as you. It's just that they started from a different base.
Did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think one more concrete thing, and thank you both, I think those are important pieces of the puzzle, is that we have to actually make an effort to diversify our personal networks as well, right? How often do we refer a colleague, someone that we worked with previously at a company or someone we went to school with, right? And we do an exercise at Netflix with our leaders, Dave's probably been the victim of it at least once, where we ask folks to really list out the folks that they interact with the most, right, on a daily, monthly basis, right? And look at actually how homogenous those folks are, right? Racially, are they all married? Do they all have the same kinds of degrees, et cetera, et cetera? Because if we don't put in the actual work, right, and it's hard work to diversify your network, but if we don't do that, right, and I think it's important to obviously reach out to colleges and so forth, but I think personally, right, we have to make the investment and the commitment ourselves to really get to know people that we've personally been underexposed to, right? They're underrepresented because we've been underexposed to them, right? And make those connections so that we can bring them in, right? Yes, I know someone, I met someone. I mentioned historically Black colleges and universities a little earlier. We asked a bunch of leaders at Netflix to go, right, to those colleges this year. And there's a level of discomfort involved in this work because, we're not accustomed to being a minority, perhaps, in certain spaces. And I think it's absolutely necessary to get uncomfortable, to get vulnerable, to really push ourselves in that network expansion if we're going to bridge this gap.
Absolutely. So let's fast forward a little bit. I'm a graduate of MBIT, which is the Middle Bucks Institute of Technology, which I believe is somehow related to MIT. Okay, that joke failed. How, when people are ready to enter the workforce, how should we start thinking about, like, how do we get people here? How do we get people to think about networks? How do we get them away from, not to say, and I'm sure Vijay, you'll have something to say about this, AI and ML and things like that. There are certainly reasons why those are relevant to networks, but that today is like the hotness that I'm sure Nick is hearing about nonstop at Stanford. It's really easy to connect with that, not necessarily easy to connect with the infrastructure that underpins all of that. How do we get people interested in that infrastructure so we can get them in this room?
So one thing that we're doing, so firstly, there was some stats recently brought out by the Uptime Institute that stated that 10% of managers in the data center industry had 0 women on their design, construction, engineering team, and something like 58% had less than 10% women. So there's a fundamental gap there. One of the things that, because for our industry to work, we need it across the board, and obviously the lens that I have is the data center space. And so what we're doing is we're teaming with the likes of the Northern Virginia Community College to be able to provide job shadowing so that people, youngsters in high school, can figure out, they don't even know that this industry exists. And I think that's one thing as well that's tasked, that we all need to take on board, is how do we advocate for this industry and help people know that it exists. And so certainly teaming up with the colleges is absolutely crucial, but I think providing that grassroots level, and then when we do get people into our industry and they're at the entry level, I think one of the biggest challenges that we're seeing is what's called the broken rung of the ladder, and particularly with women. How do we get women past the first rung of the ladder? Because what we're finding is while men and women come on board within our industry at kind of equal levels, when it gets to the manager level, it starts to fall off, and only 68% of women make it to the next level, whereas obviously 100% of the equivalent of the men do. So that's just a challenge that we're trying to focus on as well. How do we get people to the next level? Because I think we are seeing improvements at the C-suite level, but we've got to feed the pipeline.
Vijay, Rami?
I would say, engineers are driven by purpose and driven by a mission that they feel excited about. And I think that's the thing that we need to hone in on as we look to solve the very legitimate problem of making networking an appealing field for young technologists and engineers to choose as a career. And I've honed this practice over the years at Juniper by necessity. If you think about it from the standpoint of plumbing, I mean, honestly, to me, plumbing is actually an exciting thing, but to many, it's not. Going above the plumbing into what you enable, into the purpose behind what we do, what we drive, the things that would be literally impossible. The fact that, networks are not for email and cat videos these days. It's our lives, our livelihood, our health depends on the kinds of things that happens over these products and the solutions and the networks that we're building. That tends to have a much better chance of success.
I would argue that cat videos are imperative to our mental health.
I'm not going to debate that, actually.
So what are, either Nick or anyone else who'd like to answer, what are the big trends? So student comes in, they say, hey, to Rami's point, I want to be an internet plumber. What do we teach them now? Because it's not conft, router, BGP, blah. What is it now?
So there's two answers to this. There's one that a way in which I wish we could answer, which is to say what I wish we were doing, and that which we are really still doing, because it's quite hard to change the way in which we teach the next generation, because it's a moving target. Right? Everyone in this room is aware that the networking industry and every aspect of it is changing very fast. It looks so different from how it did 12 or 15 years ago. And so we're trying to figure out how to prepare the students for 10 or 12, 15, 20 years in the future, who the hell actually knows what that's going to look like? But we can guess. And so when students come in, we try still to give them a good grounding in systems, software. It's more software focused today in terms of the education and the teaching. More hands-on exercises, giving them a chance to build a piece of the network for themselves. Our introductory networking class at Stanford, which is in transition itself. Currently, we have them in software, build bits of TCP, they build a router, they build other pieces, and then they string it together. Over time, my guess is that that will rise up a little bit, and so they will think of it as something, or we would like them to think of the network as something they program as a platform for where they're expressing a behavior, it gets partitioned and compiled down to run on these elements. And they're essentially building a programmable system, which is a large distributed system in its own right. So how do you prepare students for that? Do you dispense with the BGP, the 7-layer model, all of those things that we learned when we were learning about networking? Well, to some extent you have to, because there isn't time to do that and do justice to the things in the future. So what do you throw out and what do you keep? So I think you'll see that our classes and at other universities is trying to boil it down to the essence. And we will get it wrong sometimes, for sure. And we will learn as we go. But we spend a lot of time thinking about this and how to prepare that next generation.
Do you, how much of, do you see people coming in who want to think about kind of bigger picture more than the in-depth technicals of it? And do you see those students come through where they're coming through CS, but more theoretical CS or more business-geared CS?
So I see this very limited population. They're Stanford students. So they are both broad and deep, and they're the smartest people in the place, right? So we learn more from them than they learn from us. And so they're not particularly representative of the broader tech population, or those that are going in elsewhere. So but the desire to build stuff is still very strong. I think we sometimes fear that when we went from the generation that built radios to the generation that wrote software, we were still building stuff. We were just building stuff in a different way. And so that tinkering, building stuff that works, for which you can get that gratification. And we all know you can get quicker gratification from software, building something in software than hardware. And so that is alive and strong. So I take that as a very good sign. And so this desire to build things and see the consequences of it. One anecdote that I share is that in addition to the greater diversity of our student body, the reason that they're going into computer science is changing as well. It used to be, if a student came to my office hour and I would ask them why they got into computer science, they were nearly always male, and they were usually the son of a male engineer. That was the biggest predictor. Like with doctors, the biggest predictor of a doctor is that they're the son or daughter of a doctor. And that was because they had that experience, and they knew, actually, that as an engineer, you get to do something different every day, right? It's always new challenges and unless you've had that experience, you don't know that. Now, that student is typically someone who comes in with an interest in science and mathematics, who is looking to do something useful. It may be social good, it may be building a better internet, it may be, but they've actually got the application in mind and of what they want to do with it. That is a very notable change in the last 10 years, as far as we're concerned. And they're a lot more interesting as a consequence, because they've got a much broader set of interests and reasons for doing it.
So what you've described as far as what people, we know that there are companies in the room like Google and Facebook and even Netflix to some extent, Amazon, others, who hire directly out of the pipeline of students that you churn out, for lack of a better word. And there are also a lot of people in this room who think about things, who have come up in this industry over the last 10, 20, 30 years, and think about things very differently from the way that you're training students who come out now. How do we evolve the careers of the people who work for us today as we start talking about, intent-based networking and things like that? How do we get them there? So we're not leaving people behind. How do we make sure that these people who we've invested, whether they're in our corporate culture or otherwise, we don't leave them behind and just default to let's take new people out of the pipeline. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one thing is that we have to be actively interrogating our biases, right, at every step, and that's quite an uncomfortable thing. I think the first step is actually getting really comfortable with the fact that we have biases against certain groups of folks, and I would say, for leaders as well as everyone else, get really comfortable sharing those moments when you recognize it's happening with friends, with family, wherever you can do it. Safely, so that because really you can't wrestle with that and overcome it and get to that goal unless you start with really actively interrogating them and owning them and speaking them.
Yeah, so I think the biggest risk for any company, including a company like Juniper, is the resistance of its employee base to change in an industry that is changing rapidly. And so if you think about my job, one of the most important elements of my job is to ensure that we as a company overcome that resistance. So I had a VP leadership offsite just 2 weeks ago. And in front of all the worldwide VP population of Juniper, I basically challenged them. I said, I need you to do two things. One is to ensure that you're embracing the change and you're picking up the skills that are necessary to protect the future of this company. And two is to look at inclusion and diversity not as an imperative that's led by HR or something that you're doing because I'm telling you to, but because it's scientifically proven to improve the success rate of this company. So I think ultimately today we live in a world where everybody has the resources to better themselves, to learn new skills, new capabilities, but it's the overcoming the mental barriers, the resistance to change, the complacency that is often too easy to embrace change and learn new things that will allow you to stay ahead of the curve and ultimately to win.
Would you have advice for someone in the room who wanted to invest in that change themselves, whether their employer was interested in them making that change or not? If they wanted to grow, where would they start?
Yeah, I mean, so this is where, Juniper itself has all sorts of, they have university tuition programs and courses that will help in sort of learning new skills, et cetera. But I also would say that there are such a wealth and a breadth of information and resources that are out there for people to tap into for either no cost or very low cost that anybody has the ability to tap into. And so what will distinguish those that are ultimately able to make the transition, to make the pivot, to better themselves, to be more effective leaders in the future, and those that don't, is going to be very much about the initiative, the ambition, the courage that those individuals have to tap into those resources, in my opinion.
Vijay, did you look like you wanted to say something?
Yes, change is hard, right? So the first part is accepting change. Most people here, by the virtue of being here, have been successful for a long time at their careers. And jumping off into a different mode where they may face failure is psychologically daunting, right? I mean, we should acknowledge that. But as Coach Wooden said, right, change is rarely fatal, but failure to change almost always is, right? So it's worth thinking about where you're going. And it doesn't mean necessarily that everybody has to kind of start learning Python or C# to become relevant. There's a lot of distributed systems knowledge, underlying wealth of knowledge, as Rami said. You have it, the industry has it. How do you synthesize all of that and then kind of build the future with that is going to be the step forward. Sitting and like kind of covering your ears is probably not going to be useful. And we've seen that happen, right? I mean, I've been out of the networking industry for a couple of years. I came back and it's like, wow, this is so much has changed so fast. It is amazing. So to that, I will leave you with that.
one thing that I've definitely wrestled with over the years with my staff and even myself personally is that tension that we have between I want to be a leader in the space. So I want, I think I'm one of the smartest people in the room, so I should have a big say in whatever the architecture is. And, I confuse that with being the leader so that I'm leading people or I'm leading a business function. How do we guide people who look at career growth and want to try to make that decision, deciding between, do I want to be an engineering leader? Do I want to be in management? Do I want to be a technical leader? Am I a principal? How do I think about that?
I can jump in. Yeah, sorry.
You're violently shaking your head, so go for it.
Yeah. This is because this is a topic that's near and dear. First, I'd say, Juniper, we have a technical track and a management track, and if we, and I'm sure that's not unique in this industry, if we as leaders make our engineers feel that the only way for them to be in positions of influence is for them to manage teams, and we've obviously failed them. And so we have to make sure that they have the seat at the table, the positions of influence, the exposure to setting strategy and making meaningful decisions, even if they choose a track that's not people-oriented. And I want to just actually maybe say a couple more things about this, which is that, I've had the experience now at Juniper where I've worked for many years as an engineer, and then I switched over to what we call at Juniper the dark side, the business side of things, and then ultimately made my way through the ranks to this position. I use my technical skills in this job very often. And obviously Juniper is a technology company, so you would say that's pretty intuitive, but I think in the future, every company is a technology company of sorts, increasingly. And so having the technical chops, you don't have to be the engineer, but having technical chops and the ability to use technology as a way to help you and influence or make good, sound decisions, I think is really important. The line is blurring between those two tracks.
Yeah, I would add that I think the question is also for leaders to consider what kind of leadership style they have and who their leadership style privileges and who it disadvantages, right? Because I think women and people of color do a really good job at knowing exactly what they want or what they'd like to go for, right? If the deck isn't kind of stacked against them, right? So if you're a very extroverted leader and your meetings are very debate style, right? What can you actually do, right, to create an environment where there's kind of more of an equal playing field for folks, where, differences are actually valued, that allows folks to ask themselves that question and to become leaders where leadership doesn't equate like me, right? Just because someone's like you doesn't mean that they're necessarily an excellent leader or sort of vice versa.
I guess the only thing that I think about when we think about the different styles, whether it's you're going down the engineering or the business side, as we kind of bring this back to diversity and inclusion, I think one thing that's worth noting, and I heard a talk recently from a woman by the name of Catty Kay, who's the news anchor for the BBC World News, and she gave a talk recently. She's written a book called The Confidence Code, and I think it's really important to recognize the difference in confidence levels between men and women. And women will typically only apply for a job when they're 100% confident that they have the skills to do so. Men will do so when they have 60% of the skills, because they feel they'll just learn the other 40% on the job. So I think it's important to recognize that. And so I think there's a big focus on making sure that we're cognizant of that, and then recognizing when maybe people aren't putting their hands up to maybe go forward for the promotion or go down the principal path, that there is that gender difference in terms of confidence levels between both men and women. It's also stated that men overstate their confidence levels by 30%. Just a fact, but...
We did a study a few years ago among students in our introductory computer science class who had received a B grade. And so it was a survey amongst the men and the women who had received a B. And, at Stanford, there's a lot of A's that get given. And so a B is not universally thought of as a good grade. So the female students tended to think of this as a very negative. I can't do computer science, or, I'm not cut out for this. And the men generally said, I've got this. This is fine. I'm good at this, I got a B. Hey, I'm going places. And the difference in the viewpoint was quite startling. And it led to a lot of reflection about the way that grading is done as well, in terms of the confidence level coming in.
Avi, do you have a...
Hi, Avi Friedman. I have a question. We know in this room that a lot of us don't have PhDs, don't have computer science degrees. I'm one class short of my degree, so I don't have a degree. And we see, and we actually hire for people that have self-discovered, demonstrated self-interest, and sort of use the resources out there. But I find that people from different backgrounds didn't always have the privilege to take the time or have the resources to learn that way. So I'm wondering, in the cultures, specifically Databricks and Netflix and Juniper, how you encourage people that deciding where they want to go with their career is something that they need to be able to articulate and drive, but then you'll support them if they haven't had that kind of pattern, from working with people in family or professionally.
I'll answer first. We very classically at Netflix used to have a culture where it was like, you got hired to do a job, you do that job, you go home, and if you are, curious about growth, you figure out that growth at home, not in the workplace. And it turns out that's not really sustainable long term. I mean, who would have thought? So we're definitely thinking about it more in a holistic way of how do we grow people where they are now and let them take the initiative. So we're not necessarily saying, well, to get this new job, you need to have this specific skill set. But we are saying, like, if you have a career path in mind that we can accommodate, and we're infamous for not having a ton of hierarchy. So a career path for us is not from like engineer 2 to engineer 3 or from engineer 8 to principal 1 type of thing. It is much more like, how do you think about holistically your long-term career and how can we invest in that?
I didn't mean to leave DRT out, sorry.
So I'll tell you that we've always encouraged the Juniper conversations, we call them conversations days, between managers and their teams around all sorts of topics. But I'll fill you in on one OKR, objective, that we're setting, and a key result we're setting for 2020, which is 100% of employees in the company, we're close to 10,000 people, will have a career objective, career growth conversation with their managers so that they're well understood by both the employee and the manager.
Vijay.
So we have very similar approaches that Rami just mentioned, plus we have an education budget that we encourage people. And working at Databricks, there are like 3 professors on staff. So it's like getting your PhD dissertation defense every day and just showing up to work. So we try to encourage that. We also have a large open source component. So people, when we hire from the open source community and we give back to the open source community, so you get your peer feedback as well in terms of career growth and different directions that you may want to step into.
Suzie, nothing to...
Thank you.
Thanks, Avi. I can throw it out to the audience for any other questions for a couple minutes if it's curious anything about it from our panelists. Excuse me. Question over here.
Hi, Susan Forney, Hurricane Electric. You've been talking about how important it is to enable, diverse groups to get access into their careers and, get over microaggressions and help them. And so I thought it might be interesting to hear from each one of the panel members how you have done something in your career to enable another employee or a colleague to get past some of this, because as a community, we only change the culture by, every person participating. And I thought if every one of you gave an example of how you did it, it might help everyone.
It's awesome. Suzie.
Sure, I think I've mentioned some of these. So first and foremost, when we set up Women's Leadership or Women's Tech Forum 3 years ago, it was because we felt that there wasn't an environment where the women in this industry could come together and just network in a relaxed and safe environment. So that was really important to us that we provided that. We have one rule, which is no selling, but it brings our entire industry together and it just allows people to talk to each other, maybe share experiences, get some advice, maybe find a mentor while you're there. And then in addition to that, at Digital Realty, setting up the women's group there. And it seems like so basic. It's just there wasn't one there. There was a question asked at one of the company all hands that says, why aren't there more women in a senior position or indeed in any positions within the company? And we really didn't have a great answer for that. But I think then when we set up the really very much a grassroots effort to bring the women in the company together, to have those conversations, to advocate, to try and bring more women on board, I think we've seen a huge amount of progress over the last 2 years or so with that particular group.
That's awesome. Nick?
It's, as a teacher, it's what we're supposed to do. I can't say we always do it very well, but the most notable sort of memory for me, the one that really actually changed my life and hopefully changed someone else's too, was in 2014 we started teaching high school students in Istanbul. And these were students for whom they had no prior knowledge of computer science. It was a 2-week intensive residential program where they get their first introduction to computer science, and we teach them the freshman class that we teach at Stanford. And the very first class, there was a 16-year-old girl that came to the class, and she said to me in perfect English, "I have no idea why I'm here. I'm not interested in computer science at all. In fact, I don't even know what it is. I want to do something else. I'm only here because my mum told me I have to come." And it turns out she was the valedictorian at her school. Incredibly capable at math and at science. And had no idea what engineering was. She was going to go and study chemistry or physics because that's what she knew in school. At the end of the 2 weeks, she said, "Now I know what I want to do with my career." And it makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up when I tell you this story. Because then she went on and studied computer science and came back and was an assistant teacher for us a couple of years later. And now, that's an anecdote, and so we've been trying to figure out how to make this scale. And the thing that it taught me was the relatively simple way of in-person mentoring, or that in-person experience. We all saw the growth of those MOOCs, the massive online open courses. Guess what? They don't really work at bringing new people in. Most of the people that use those MOOCs are the people that are highly motivated students who are already knowledgeable of a field trying to brush up. They're not. There's only a 5% completion rate. And so as a method for bringing new people in, it has to be done in person. This is the conclusion I've come to. And so we have to figure out how we get out to folks who otherwise wouldn't have that experience. And that's why I would encourage you to try and do the same.
What I heard in the question from Susan was a question about allyship, and that's what I took away from it, which is that how can you be better in helping people who are potentially underserved who want to get into this industry. One of the biggest first steps you can take in that is understanding, to Julia's points earlier, in my opinion, your unconscious biases. I personally know that, like, for example, I'm a gay man. I would figure that, like, I wouldn't have the biases on gender that a lot of other people would theoretically have, that a straight male might have. And I take tests. I took these tests. Is it the MIT thing, or which one?
It's Harvard.
Harvard, thank you. And it was an Ivy League thing, where you basically think you're playing almost a game to figure out what your biases are. And it turns out, like, I'm just as bad, if not worse, than anyone else who would take that same test. Sexuality be damned. And so learning that made me go, well, what assumptions am I making about women when I'm working with them on a day-to-day basis? And how can I be better at helping them grow? And am I making assumptions that, maybe what I was taught as a child is that they don't want to grow. It's just whatever, like things like that, which are just ridiculous assumptions to make, that you don't even realize you're making, but it's how you were brought up. It's, nurture just as much as nature. So understanding, to me, is like the key first step for any of this.
I love this question so much because we all understand the business ad of diversity, right? But it doesn't stick. You don't retain folks unless you do the inclusion work. You mentioned microaggressions. We did a big exercise with a bunch of the leaders at Netflix where we asked them to identify a moment in their adult life when they had othered someone, really committed to microaggression, for instance, and to think through the impact, right, that potentially seemingly very small moment had on that other person, on them, on the dynamics of folks around, right, and to actually tell this story to the folks that they work with, right? This is a very effective way to actually get more comfortable in the vulnerability, to own, to speak, hey, I had this bias. I saw a man walking through the hall, and I asked him for the Wi-Fi code, and I realized I made an assumption that he works here because he's not a white person, right? Actually being able to say what that is and to work through what the impact is a really, really excellent tool that I recommend for all folks to give that a try.
Vijay?
So I'll give a concrete example to Susan's point. And so this is at a previous company, a promising search engine down in Mountain View, where we had this amazing. So we were building a lot of.
You're talking about Bing, right?
Yes, we were building a lot of hardware, and optics are a large component of that of the bill of materials. And we had this amazing test results that kept coming out to us. I don't know if Bakash is in this audience or not. He'll know who I'm talking about. Amazing test results on optics kept coming back from the platform group. And we were like, who is this? This is somebody who's really like buttoned up and top notch. And so we found out who the tester was, and it was this PhD in optics out of Berkeley called Wendy Zhao. And we were like, she is just amazing, but she had no experience whatsoever in networking. She is actually like, her dissertation was on like VXL cavity resonance. But her quality of work and the effort she put into it was so amazing that in teeth of massive opposition, we actually interviewed her, fast-tracked her, and brought her into our side of the house, where in like, I think 4 or 5 years, I think she was the first superb or like very strongly exceeds rating in the entire group in at least my half a decade there. And now, then she rose to senior staff, almost principal at the search engine, and now she's running like 300 people at Alibaba. So that was kind of like where we had to fight against perception. Oh, this is an optics tester. Why do you think she'll be able to run or design networks? And if you probably did a search today, a lot of it ran over her designs. So.
Rami?
An example of a system that I'm proud of that we recently put in place is a formal executive sponsorship program, not mentorship, but sponsorship program, where sponsors are by definition have to be people that are in position of influence in the company, that can make decisions, that can create opportunities. So I recruited my entire executive staff as well as a few more people around the company to become executive sponsors. We identified around 20 or so hypo diverse candidates within the company that we want to see advance their careers. And then what these sponsors do is essentially advocate. They advocate, especially behind closed doors, when the candidates or the hypos are not even around, for their sponsorees. And ultimately, the end result I'm looking for is to increase the number of diverse promotions in the company. And I'm actually quite optimistic this is going to pay off for us.
Okay, lightning round, because we're over on time, but I want to get this real quick. What is the one thing you're going to do in 2020 to get new faces in this room, or whether it's this room or we just talk about this room as the industry in general? What's one thing each of you will do?
Well, I think one thing that on behalf of Women's Tech Forum, I think we want to partner with NANOG. We've got access to, as I said, 750 women globally who work in this industry, but maybe not in this particular field. And I think it's really important the way that we're going to grow is through partnerships with organizations such as NANOG. So I believe Seattle is one that we're going to target together.
Awesome. Nick?
We're going to try and teach 700 high school students in 4 different countries for their first experience in computer science this summer. No idea how it will go, but we'll do that as best we can. There's csbridge.stanford.edu. We'll tell you about it. If you want to get involved, better still, encourage your company to fund us to do it better.
Please.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to encourage everyone in the room to stop asking what underrepresented folks can do to succeed, right? And really flip the question and ask how you can create the conditions for them to thrive.
So 2 specific things. One, I've raised the underrepresented minority outreach for our internship program because, like I said, where you start from almost always depends where you end up. And the second thing is I'm going to spend personally a fair amount of time going around talking to schools around how to crack the coding interview. Basically, I'm taking the Stanford CS9 material and just presenting and giving that talk to a wider audience who are not at Stanford.
Rami?
So I mentioned one thing, which is the sponsorship program, which I'm actually super proud of. But then the other thing that I think I'm going to do is we're going to change the composition of our interviewer panels to increase the likelihood of bringing in more diverse candidates into the company.
That's awesome. I'm personally going to go visit the high school and the tech school that I credit with my success. And the thing I'll leave the room with is all of your high schools would love to hear from you. What you do in this room is awesome. People can absolutely identify with what most of your networks do. Right? There's a lot of applications that are familiar to all ages in this room, and they want to hear from you, and they want to hear success stories, and that's going to absolutely improve the chances that we get more amazing faces in this room. And with that, I'd like to thank my panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.